In 1953, a chemist from the University of Chicago named Willard Libby sat down in a room with other atomic scientists and made a decision that would change what happened to thousands of dead children around the world. He was trying to understand something that kept him awake at night. Nuclear weapons were being tested constantly. The fallout was spreading everywhere, and nobody actually knew what it was doing to people. Specifically, he wanted to know about strontium-90. That was the isotope that worried him most. It behaves like calcium. It gets pulled into bone. It stays there. It radiates, and children's bones take it up faster than anything else. So Libby said something in that 1953 meeting that would become one of the most damning sentences ever recorded in a classified government document. He said, "If anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country." Body snatching. That is what he called it. Not collecting, not sampling, body snatching. And then he smiled, because the government was about to help him do exactly that. Project Sunshine. It started that year. The official mission was to measure strontium-90 levels in human tissue. The real mission was to collect the bones of dead infants and children from hospitals across the world without asking their parents for permission. So from 1953 all the way through to the 70s, the United States and Britain ran a coordinated operation to harvest human remains from the dead young. In Chicago, scientists cremated 44 newborns and measured the strontium-90 in the ash. In London, hospital staff delivered boxes of bones to be shipped to America. In Australia, hospital workers extracted samples from dead children without notifying families. In Hong Kong, bones were collected and sent north. In Scotland, a baby girl named Sally had her remains used for testing. Her mother never knew. Nobody asked. Over 15 years, they collected bones from more than 6,000 dead infants and children. 6,000. That's not a rounding error. That is thousands of funerals, thousands of mothers and fathers burying their babies, and thousands of those mothers and fathers having no idea that hospital staff had removed pieces of their child to ship across the ocean for science experiments. The children's bones were cremated. The remains were ground up. The ash was analysed. The data was recorded. And the information Libby got proved exactly what he feared. Strontium-90 in children's bones was rising. The test showed that the radioactive isotope had a high carcinogenic capability. Quote, "Young and growing tissue is most susceptible to radiation damage." By the time Libby got that answer, the program had already been running for years. The bones were already collected, the families were already grieving without knowing what had happened to their children. What makes Project Sunshine very different from every other story on this channel is the physical evidence. There are no documents sitting in archives that people have not seen. There is no debate about whether something happened. There is physical evidence. There are bones in labs. There are ashes. There is proof of what was done because the remains themselves were proof. And for decades, those remains sat in storage, hidden, classified, treated as national security material. The government locked the evidence away the same way it locked away the truth, until one day in the 1990s, a journalist started asking questions, and the government had to open the filing cabinet and admit what Willard Libby had done. When the news broke, the mothers and fathers who had buried their children in the 1950s and 60s suddenly found out that their grief had been used. Their loss had been weaponized. The bones of their babies had been property of the state. The government had decided that the advancement of atomic knowledge was worth more than the dignity of asking a parent if their dead child could be used in an experiment. The Atomic Energy Commission eventually acknowledged that families were probably not notified or asked permission. Probably. That is how the government apologizes, with the word probably. Like the fact of what happened was somehow uncertain. But Project Sunshine was just one program. The physical evidence does not stop with the bones. On the Kara Sea, in the Arctic Ocean, the Soviet Navy spent years dumping reactors, entire reactor compartments from nuclear-powered submarines. They sank them deliberately, 17,000 containers of radioactive waste. They dumped them in the deep water and classified the location. The evidence was underwater. It was hidden. It was not going to be found until someone decided to look. On Johnston Atoll, a tiny speck in the Pacific Ocean, the United States buried stockpiles of nerve agents and Agent Orange. Thousands of tons of the most toxic chemicals ever made, buried in drums, buried in shallow soil. The evidence was right there, but the island was remote. The government controlled access. The physical proof was hidden in plain sight because nobody was allowed to see it. On Grenard Island, off the coast of Scotland, the British government tested biological weapons. They released anthrax, and the entire island became contaminated. The government declared it off limits. They put up a fence, they put up signs, no entry. For 48 years, that was how long the physical evidence sat there. Actual anthrax in the soil, proof of what had been done. In 1990, the British government said the island was safe. They had decontaminated it. The evidence had been cleaned away, but locals still would not go there. The people who lived nearby did not believe the government when it said the anthrax was gone. They had watched that island for half a century. They knew what had happened there, and they did not trust a document that said everything was fine. The physical evidence told a different story than the official statement. The bones told a story that contradicted what the government said about strontium-90 safety. The reactors at the bottom of the Arctic told a story about Soviet secrecy. The chemicals at Johnston Atoll told a story about what America was willing to bury literally and figuratively. The anthrax in Scottish soil told a story that documents and cleanup reports could never fully erase. This is what separates Project Sunshine from every other program. The remains do not lie. The bodies do not stay silent. The physical evidence persists, and when it is finally discovered or revealed, it forces the government to admit what happened because there is something more powerful than a document. There is bone, there is ash, there is strontium-90 and the calcium of dead children. There is proof that cannot be denied because you can hold it, you can measure it, you can see it, you can feel it and smell it, and you can see it with your own eyes. Willard Libby died in 1981. He won a Nobel Prize for his work on radiocarbon dating. He is remembered as one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. Nobody talks about Project Sunshine when they talk about his legacy. Nobody mentions the 6,000 dead children. Nobody talks about their mothers who buried their babies, not knowing that the government had already taken pieces of them. The bones were the evidence. The bones were the witnesses. And when the truth finally came out, it was because the evidence had been hiding in storage the whole time, waiting. Just waiting for someone to ask the right question, waiting for someone to demand to know where all those bones went. And when you start looking for the buried samples, you find them everywhere. In laboratories and archives, in the deep ocean, in the soil of remote islands, in the ash of cremated children. The physical evidence of what governments did exists. It was hidden, it was classified, it was protected, but it was never gone. The bones were still there. The proof was always there. Everybody just agreed not to look.